the back of the brain, okay? So the occipital lobe is a lobe, the back of your brain. All right, some couple parts I would like for you to know as far as anatomy of the eye, okay? The pupil. So the pupil is what allows for light to enter into the eye. All right, then you have the iris. Okay, the iris is what opens, expands, so dilates or constricts. So the iris controls how much light enters into the eye. Okay, so if the iris is big and open, a lot of light is allowed into the eye. If the iris is closed or constricts, so it's smaller, then it allows less light into the eye. Okay, so if the iris is more constricted, it makes the pupil look smaller. If the iris is more open, it makes the pupil look bigger. Okay, the white of the eye is the sclera. And then up here are the lacrimal glands. Okay, the lacrimal glands and lacrimal ducts. In other words, these are what produce your tears. Okay, so the lacrimal glands are what produce your tears. Okay, so the function of the lacrimal gland is to produce the tears. All right, so your lacrimal glands produce tears. Okay, the conjunctiva. Okay, this is a membrane that lines the eye, and covers part of the eyeball. So lines the eyelid, covers part of the eyeball. This secretes a mucus which helps keep the eye lubricated. Okay, inflammation of this is known as pink eye. All right, in fancy words, it's called conjunctivitis. So anytime you have the word itis attached to something, that means inflammation of. So inflammation of the conjunctiva, and in lay terms, we say the pink eye. Okay, some more anatomy of the eye. Your eye muscles. Okay, so we do have 6 eye muscles on one eyeball, so you have 12 total. Okay, also here's a picture for you on the conjunctiva. All right, so these are the 6 muscles of the eye: the lateral rectus, medial rectus, superior rectus, and inferior rectus. Okay, so I call these the 4 corners of the eye. Okay, even though the eyeball is a sphere, you know, I still call it the 4 corners. You'll see why in a second. And they're named after location. Okay, so lateral means it's on the lateral side of the eyeball. Medial is on the medial side of the eyeball, closer to your nose. So the superior muscle is on top of the eyeball, and the inferior muscle is on the bottom. So if you're looking at an eye, okay, there's the pupil. So here's the muscle that would be on top. That would make it the superior. Now rectus means straight, so these muscles run in a straight line. Here's the bottom part, so here's your nose. Okay, so this is the bottom part, so that would be the inferior rectus. Closer to your nose is the midline, so there's the medial rectus area. And the lateral part of the eye, so your ear would be this way. So there's your lateral part. So as you can see, it's kind of like the four corners of the eyeball. Okay, then you have, so remember you have 6 eye muscles. We just named 4, located in the 4 corners of the eye. Okay, then you have the superior oblique and the inferior oblique. The word oblique is kind of a fancy word for diagonal. Okay, so these oblique muscles are located on top and bottom, right? So superior, which is up here, but they curve. So that's why they get the oblique name. And the inferior also curves. Okay, so when you look at the picture here, you can see okay, here's the superior oblique. See how it kind of curves like that? And here's the inferior oblique. Kind of has an oblique curve to it. So those are the 6 muscles of the eye, and you have those on both eyes. Okay, inside of the eye, you have the lens. Okay, the lens is what bends light so that the light hits on the retina, so the back of the eye, accurately. Okay, so all this stuff back here is the retina. Okay. There's your optic nerve. Okay, this is an important nerve structure. It's what allows us to see. Eventually, this wire, this nerve, goes all the way back to the occipital lobe. Okay, the eye is filled with fluid. All right, so if you were to take the eye and draw a line by the lens, okay, all the fluid in the front is called the aqueous humor. Okay, humor is a fancy word for fluid. Okay, so the aqueous humor is the fluid that is in front of the lens. Okay, all the fluid back here behind the lens is called the vitreous humor. Okay, so all the fluid that's behind the lens is called the vitreous humor. Okay, the retina, which is on the back of the eye, it does contain millions of nerves, millions of photoreceptors. Okay, and the rods, so the nerves that they call the rods, are responsible for your night vision. Okay, so in other words, your eye's ability to adapt to a dark room, night vision, is rods, and your eye's ability to adapt to day and color is called the cones. All right. So for example, if you are, let's say camping, right? It's at night and your eyes are acclimated to the nighttime and someone takes a white light, flashlight, and shines in your eyes, you know, you have that temporary spot blindness because of the quick transition from rods and cones, okay? Or you walk into, it's daytime outside, you walk into a dark room, and I mean, it's really dark and you can't really see anything, but if you just give it a minute, then you start to see stuff, right? So your eyes can adapt to day and night, okay? So that's the rods and the cones. Okay, so all this information eventually gets sent to the occipital lobe. okay, which is the visual, helps with interpreting vision. Okay, night blindness occurs when a person has prolonged deficiency of vitamin A. Okay, prolonged deficiency of vitamin A. Vitamin A is the building block for the pigment of the photoreceptors in the cells needed to respond to light. So you don't have vitamin A, then you start to hurt the photoreceptors over time, okay? If you take vitamin A, it can restore function, all right? Now there are limitations to matter. So that being said, you know, if it crosses a line, then, you know, you might not be able to get it back, okay? All right, these are what the nerves look like. So you have the rods and the cones is animation of what they would look like. Okay, as light comes in through the lens, eventually it hits the back of the eye, and all these photoreceptors interpret it and send it down the nerve all the way to the occipital lobe. Okay, you're also seeing blood vessels coming in and out of the eye there. Okay, here's also a bunch of those photoreceptors, those little nerves that help you interpret light and vision. Okay, the lens does bend. Okay, so depending on where you're looking and how you're looking, the lens does bend. Okay, so if you look here, if you're looking at something from far away, so a distant source, the lens tends to relax. Okay, if you compare it to this lens, which is bulged or contracting, okay, this lens is relatively relaxed, taking the light and bending it, focusing it on the back of the retina. If a person needs corrective lens, that is because the light that is coming in is hitting too far back and focusing here, or coming in and focusing like right there, okay? So when they add a corrective lens, depending on what you need as far as a prescription, it will change and move the light to the appropriate focal area on the retina. Okay, so that is the purpose of, let's just say, a corrective lens. And everybody's different, what kind of prescription they need, and so on. Okay, so if you're looking at something close up, okay, the lens will bend, it bulges to focus the light where it's supposed to on the back of the retina. Okay, glaucoma is when drainage of that fluid, right? So drainage of that aqueous humor is inadequate. Okay, it's inadequate or blocked. And what happens is you start to get pressure build up within the eye. Okay, and the more the pressure builds up, the more it starts to compress on the retina, creating some damage. Okay, early signs and symptoms that these people might have are halos. So they start to see these halos as they look around. They can get headaches, blurred vision. Okay, the eye does harden. So that's why you use a tonometer to measure the tone or firmness of the eye. You want the eye to be relatively somewhat squishy. You know, you don't want it to feel like a marble, right? So these days with technology, the eye doctors use a tonometer to figure that out. This is what the back of the eye, the posterior aspects of the eye should look like. Okay, so all this that you're seeing, that's called the fundus. Okay, so everything in the back of the eye is called the fundus. So that's why you either use a fundoscope, also known as an ophthalmoscope, to look into someone's eye to look at the structures. Okay, so here's some, and this is a normal picture, by the way. that you're seeing a normal eye. So these are the blood vessels. Okay, there's the optic disc. So the optic nerve is there. This is the fovea centralis and the macula, so area of highest visual acuity. Right? Okay, so here's the nerve. So as light is coming in, your pecking order of nerves is and structures is the eyeball, okay, the cranial nerve or the optic nerve, right? Then the optic chiasm. Then you have the optic tract, and then the optic radiation as it goes back to the occipital lobe, okay, which is the visual cortex, the area of the brain that helps you interpret vision. Okay, the ear is divided into three parts. Okay, you have the external ear, the middle ear, and the internal ear. Okay, here's how they look here. So all of this, from basically this point and all that, that's the external ear. Okay, so external ear. And then we have the middle ear, which is here. Okay, so the middle ear involves the three ear bones. So the fancy word for that is called ossicles, three ear bones, malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Okay, and that's in order, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Okay, then the inner ear is this snail-looking structure. Okay, it kind of reminds me of Turbo from the movie Turbo, right? So all that internal stuff that you see there, that is the inner ear, okay? And this area is very important for hearing and balance, okay? Hearing and balance. All right, some different parts that you're seeing here. You have the auricle. So the what people commonly refer to as the ear. Okay, this is the ear canal or the external auditory meatus. Here's your eardrum. Okay, that is the tympanic membrane. So the fancy word for the eardrum is tympanic membrane. Okay, the three ear bones, the malleus and the incus and the stapes. And then we have the semicircular canals right there. Okay, these guys, which we'll talk about those in a minute. Then you have the vestibule and then the cochlea. We'll talk about all these in a minute. And of course, you have to have nerves for all this stuff to work. So there is the vestibulocochlear nerve, okay, named after the vestibule part and named after the cochlear part. So the snail neck and the snail body. So the vestibulocochlear nerve. Oh, and one more. The auditory tube, also known as the eustachian tube. Okay, auditory tube or the eustachian tube. That tube, by the way, if the pressure doesn't equalize properly in you, then you get a bunch of pressure buildup, and that hurts. Okay, if you don't believe me, go down to the bottom of a pool without equalizing pressure, see what happens to your ears. Okay, the eustachian tube there, or also known as the auditory tube, is responsible for that equalization of pressure. Okay, the pinna is also that auricle area. Okay, so this area, whoops, right there, is also the the pinna. Okay, the ceruminous glands, those are what produce your earwax. Okay, the ceruminous glands produce your earwax. The tympanic membrane is your eardrum. These are all part of the external ear. Okay, on the middle ear, where we find the ear bones, okay, and the eustachian tube, which is right there. Okay, that is necessary for drainage and equalizing of pressure. And both sides need to be equal as far as pressure is concerned for proper hearing to occur. This is why if you get some sort of cold or sinus infection or ear issue and you feel stuffy in your ear, it can decrease your hearing ability. Okay. So if there's abnormal pressure, right, you get unequal pressure, the eardrum or the tympanic membrane can bulge funny. So it can either bulge inward or outward. And you can assess this by looking into someone's ear to look for this, okay? Then you can tell what's going on. If the equalization of pressure, especially along with infections, keep occurring, then they might add ear tubes. It's called a myringectomy. Okay, also with infants and babies, if whether you're bottle feeding or breastfeeding, you want to make sure that the child is in a horizontal position. Okay, excuse me. You want to make sure that they're not in a horizontal position, because if they're horizontal and you're feeding them, then the fluid can enter into those ear tubes, okay, that eustachian tube. So you want to make sure that they're more oblique or diagonal when you feed, okay, to try to minimize the chances of fluid getting into the tubes, therefore getting into the ears, therefore causing possible ear infections and other problems. Okay, in your middle ear, when sound waves come in, right, so let me go back to this picture. Okay, I'm going to talk about the sound waves for a second. Okay, as sound waves are coming in, what ends up happening is they hit the eardrum, okay, which creates vibration, which vibrates the ear bones, which sends that information into the oval window and into the cochlea, and then down your nerve. And that's how we hear. Okay, and that is what this slide is talking about. Okay, the order of how sound waves come into the ear. Right, the inner ear, which is that snail-looking thing, right? Okay, you have the cochlea part, the vestibular part, and the semicircular canals. Okay, those are the three major parts to the inner ear. Okay, now each one has a function, which we'll talk about. Okay, in order to hear, you have to have fluid in the ear called endolymph. Okay, in no particular order. Number one, you have to have lymph, endolymph. Okay, you also need this thing called the organ of Corti. All right, the organ of Corti is right here. Okay, and you're looking at it there, and then we're going to enlarge it. So there's a big picture of the organ of Corti. That is the functional hearing area of the ear stuff. You have to have this. Okay, so what happens is the as sound waves are coming in, the sound waves irritate the lymph, okay, the fluid that's in your ear. All right, the fluid is set in motion. The fluid is set in motion, and when that happens, it irritates your nerve hairs, okay, which is a good thing. I know that word irritate can sound negative, but this is a good thing. It means it's activating the nerves. All right, and then when this happens, it sends information down cranial nerve 8, which is that vestibular cochlear nerve part, more specifically the cochlear part of the nerve, and then it goes to the brain. All right. Equilibrium, which is balance, is another function of the inner ear, and more specifically the vestibule and the semicircular canals. Okay, so these areas here are responsible for helping you balance. Okay, we have two parts to our balance. We have static equilibrium, which an example of that would be like you're sitting there, right? So if you're just sitting or just standing without movement, you still have to balance, okay? But there's not a lot of twisting or turning. So you are basically static, but you still have to balance, right? The second arm, or the second part of the vestibule is the dynamic equilibrium. And this is stuff that puts you in motion, like you're riding a bike, or you're doing gymnastics, or you're skiing, or you're ice skating. Okay, things that require motion and balance. That would be dynamic equilibrium. All right. So inside, same thing, you have to have fluid, okay, and you have to have these stones. Sometimes you might hear the word crystals, but they are otoliths. Okay, these are responsible for being stimulated to create the balance. Okay, so the pull of gravity against the crystals, which are made of calcium, a type of stone called otoliths, the pull of gravity on the fluid and the stones stimulate the nerves, so the nerve hairs, which send information down to the vestibular part of cranial nerve 8. You remember, it's the vestibulocochlear nerve, okay? And so this is the vestibular part. And then this information goes to your cerebellum. Right now, the cerebellum, which is a part in your brain, is responsible for balance and equilibrium. And here's how it would work, okay? So just by simply moving, okay, gravity is going to change the position of the fluid, which irritates the hairs, which sends information down your nerves in order for you to interpret where your head is in position to gravity. Right? So if I put you upside down right now, believe me, you would know you're upside down because of the change in gravity on the fluid that's in your ears. If I spin you, you would know, okay? So if I just simply had you look over your right or left shoulder, like you would know that's what you're doing because of the pull of gravity and where you are in space, okay? Okay, the dynamic equilibrium, as we said before, is when you're set in motion. So these are responsible for the angulatory and rotatory movements of the head. Okay, so twisting and twirling and other things that require more advanced balancing, like a bike or ice skating. This is where this is going to come into play. Okay, these are found within the semicircular canals. All right, so right here. And what picks up on this are the crystals and the fluid. Right, so you can see the endolymph, so the fluid that's inside, and then that messes with the capilla of Christi, or of Christa, and what that thing does is it's responsible for being moved, which irritates the hairs, which sends signals down the vestibular part of the nerve to the balance centers of the brain so that you know where you are in space. Okay, smell. So olfaction is the fancy word for smell. Okay, and this is functioned by cranial nerve 1. And technically it's Roman numeral. Okay, so olfactory nerve or cranial nerve 1 is done by chemical receptors, chemoreceptors. And these are receptors to help you interpret the sense of smell. So, I mean, it's pretty easy, right? Let's say I'm cooking, cooking some sort of food and you start to smell that, you would likely be able to recognize exactly what food it is based on the smell, based on the chemicals that are being released, based on the stimulation of the olfactory hairs. Okay, so these are, hairs is another word for the nerves here. Okay, and then when stimulated, it sends signals to the brain. And because the smell centers in the brain are closely related to the limbic system, which is the emotional center of the brain, a sense of smell can either stimulate good or negative thoughts or experiences. Okay, smell also has a synapse, which means it has the ability to be stored as memory. So that's why at this point, if we could release the smell of whatever, whether it's food or whether it's, motor vehicle, whatever, you know what it is. Like people, especially adults, are pretty good at being able to associate or recognize a smell, okay, because it is part of memory and located near the limbic system of the brain. Okay, here's what a smell nerve looks like right here. Right, so it does come out of cranial nerve 1, which is the olfactory tract. And you get some nerve hair fibers that come in. And then all of these things, as they interpret the chemical reaction of food or whatever, they depolarize and allows you, because of chemical reaction, to smell. You have a bunch of different taste buds. rods, cones, and sorry, not rods and cones. The taste buds that are on the tongue, okay, you have about 10,000 of them. Okay, and their names are actually the filiform, fungiform, and circumvallate, okay, the papillae. Okay, not the rods and cones. That's the eyeball stuff, right? The okay, the filiform, the fungiform, and the circumvallate, they're named because of their shape. So when they come to a point where they're sharp looking, they call them filiform. It's kind of a small rounded, it's a fungiform. And if it's a large rounded, it's a circumvallate. Okay. You have about 10,000 of these taste buds spread throughout all over the tongue and the mouth and the cheek. Okay. The nerves themselves are called gustatory cells. These are the cells that are responsible for the chemicals that are released when dissolved in saliva. Okay. So these gustatory hairs, which are intimately connected with these gustatory cells, okay, so they're all right there. They're all very tiny, basically microscopic in size, right? As food and whatever starts to, when it's on your tongue, it actually starts to seep down into these pits, so to speak, okay, where the chemicals are dissolved and the hairs, the gustatory, which is the taste hairs, help you interpret. Okay, the nerves that are responsible for that is cranial nerve 7, cranial nerve 9, and cranial nerve 10. Okay, so here's what those would look like. Right, you have the gustatory cells. Okay. And then you have the sensory nerve fiber. The whole thing is called the taste bud. And there's the pit I was talking about, whereas saliva and the food itself and all that starts to seep down into this area. Okay, you can see the enlargement of this area there, your taste buds. Right, so the chemical reaction gives you the sense of whatever it is you're tasting. And in general, we can interpret sweet, sour, bitter, and salty. Okay, any questions on the special senses there? Okay. All right, so next week, hold on. It's funny how that works. All right.